I want to start really by thanking you for being here and FACT, Forma, and the Wellcome Trust really for putting this opening together. It was really wonderful to be here yesterday in a rainy city in the FACT building, surrounded by a large crowd of people. So it was fantastic to discover Mark's work like that. And of course, before I forget it, really officially thank you, Mark, for having us. So this is Maria, who sits in the back, and me involved in this project for, I think, and David, of course, as well, over a period of over 2 years now, I think. So thanks. So what Mark asked me to do, and what we discussed for the symposium, is you don't want to hear probably too much from a neuroscientist or neurologist about art, but rather talk about the part that attracted Mark and myself to each other, which relates to questions that we share, which is subjectivity, objectivity, the notion of embodiment, and how the brain could be involved in generating such sensations. And so that's what I will start with. Just some images maybe to start with. So in what we look at, or what I've been interested in research, is if we think that a subject is here and looking at the world. Particularly interesting for what we study in the lab is, should I be in front of a reflecting surface and see myself, or a reflection of my body, as the object that this subject is looking at? And of course, for many centuries, this leads to a life's doubling. The self is doubled in this way. It can be the object and the subject of experiences. And then in research, that's not what I'm going to talk about, but of course many animals can solve or recognize themselves in mirror reflections as well. There's a nice word in German, which is a Spiegelaffe, which we describe people who spend too much time in front of the mirror, a narcissist in a way. Suggesting that this is a very special primitive form of bodily resonance between self and body. And then I think Mark has referred to this self-portrait in his writings also. Of course, here the mirror reflecting surface is very obvious, but of course the self and making the self subject and object is kind of very nicely expressed in this self-portrait by The Desperate Man by Courbet, where one could almost conceive as the canvas as the reflecting surface, leading yet to another doubling. So just to briefly introduce the self, it's not really clear, neither philosophers, neuroscientists, psychologists, nobody really knows yet what it is. It's a fascinating thing. David Hume, quite a while ago, proposed that it's a mere fiction, if you want. It's this text, maybe I quickly read it. For my part, when I enter most intimately into what I call myself, and that's the main part, I always tumble on some particular perception. Can be heat, can be cold, light, shade, love, hatred, and so on. I can never catch myself. This is this fiction part. I can never catch myself at any time without a perception. So all there is perception for him. There is no self. It's just perception. The self is not an object. It's not part of this world in the way. Not much later, English philosopher John Locke put a very different method or philosophical thought for the self: reflection and high-level cognition, not embodiment, not fiction, but reflection. Thinking about yourself is a key foundation of the self. So there is something, there is this being that has reasoned reflection, and for John Locke also important memory. So it fuses your entire life events, and it's rather this temporally continuous form that is important for the self. And people have then, and this is two notions, this what John Locke proposes, a very high-level self, if you want, cognitive thinking. It's reflexive, not mirror reflexes, but it's a cognition or the mind which thinks about the self. But what I think, and that's maybe one proposal we should discuss, where embodiment comes into play, and I think where Mark and my work meet, is this pre-reflexive notion of a self. And I'll read this again, and this is what I'll talk to for the remainder of the talk, that experiences happen for the experiencing subject in an immediate way. And they are felt as my experiences. This is not just an experience. Looking at you out there right now is my experience. There is this attribution to the self that we live, at each moment, and this is a very different part than consciously or cognitively thinking about this, because this happens independently of thought. At least that's what is proposed. So this notion of self, a pre-reflective self, is present whenever I'm living through or undergoing an experience, pain, seeing color, and so on. Now, my field has looked very similar than these philosophers, has tried to study the brain mechanisms of the self. Autobiographical memory, very important. The last time I was in Liverpool, the last thing, what I ate this morning, all this needs to be bound to the self. Thought we evoked already, René Descartes, maybe the most early and prominent proponent. And then this notion that I really want to discuss, which has also been studied now by cognitive neuroscientists, looking at your body in the mirror and looking at visual mechanisms of self-recognition, and something that, if I find my laser, that we study in the lab and many other people, the bodily self. How does the brain process my body right now in front of you, and what could be the relevance of this for the self? It's a very low-level account. It's basically signals coming to my brain and generating a self. And I think the best example is phantom limbs. So 95% of patients who suffer an amputation, let's say, as in this gentleman here, loss of a right upper forearm, there is a persistence of a phantom limb. Persistence of having a limb, okay? So this person feels a hand at this position that is as flesh-like as his physically existing hand. Of course, he knows very clearly that this can't be true, but 95% of such individuals perceive the persistence of this hand. So here we have something that is important. First of all, it's not just the persistence of a hand, it's perceived as my hand still being present in a particular position, sometimes even painful. So we have two aspects. First of all, it's perceived as a hand, so there can be a conscious sensation of having a body without there being this body, because actually the brain mechanism up here on the left side of his brain are still there. Although this body part is lost, of course, those brain regions representing the body part are still there. And once they fire, he or she will experience a phantom limb. And this is what basically how the brain sees the body. So this is a cut through the, it's this part here, which is shown in these different colors, and each different body part is represented in a different part of the brain. So this green area here is the hand. You have the legs over here, and you would have the face on this side. So this green part is still active in the patient that I've shown you just on the image before. And so if there's activity here, the subject will experience having a hand. And this is the key mechanism for phantom limb sensations, because this part is still there. But again, for subjectivity, we're not really advancing. So can there be, and this is something in the lab that we have studied, can there be phantom limb sensation like for the entire body? Can the brain generate a subject to be somewhere in space that is not at this position right here? And this is what in the past, so this is a different region, this red region here, and in this red region here is rather encoding not just a hand, not a foot, but the entire body. The entire body, and stimulation and interference with this region can lead to so-called out-of-body experiences, which you can conceive of having a second self-representation, but not at the position of the physical body, but a supernumerary representation somewhere else. And very often and quite systematically, the out-of-body experience in this case, a phantom body, and a full body that's generated by brain mechanisms, the self, if you want, of conscious perception, is not localized where it should be, as is shown here lying on the bed, but in an elevated position, 2 to 3 meters away. So what you have here is not a phantom limb, but you have a phantom body, your subject that is localized at a different position. And in much neuroscience-related work, we have tried to figure out what this particular region is doing, because stimulating, applying a small current in this region can lead to such sensations, releasing, if you want, a certain power of the brain to animate a different position in space with selfhood. So how can we study this in healthy subjects? Because these out-of-body experiences in the clinic are quite rare. They're fascinating experiences, and I think this was one of the experiences that I think Mark will probably talk about it more, that was of interest for him to in some way induce or illustrate or experiences in his installation. But this is a way now that I show a video that how we can study similar mechanisms in healthy subjects. And I hope it plays. Okay, so I play it again. So the experimenter is the one with the back towards you, and this person here is experiencing the rubber hand illusion. And so under normal conditions, when you look at your hand and somebody would touch it, you see those two stimuli, the vision and the touch, at the same position. Makes sense. But what is done here, it's dissociated. The hand is hidden, the touch cue is applied outside the field of vision, and then in front there's this ridiculously looking a fake hand, a rubber hand, and the stroking that's important is applied synchronously, because that's also something that comes back in the installation upstairs. And this is done for 2 or 3 minutes. And okay, and so this is not normally how we do it. This is just a video demonstration, and nobody really comes stabbing into the. It's a fake limb. But what is important is the other person actually comes running from the right, and he should pull away his right hand if he would be scared. That's the closest to the guy. But what he pulls away is the other hand, because what the brain does in these 10 or in this 1 minute of stimulation is associate where the stimulus is felt, so the real stimulus, and this fake hand. So it seems to put this together. And so what we try to do in our avatar experiments for the full body is to achieve something similar, but for the entire body this time, not for a hand, just like in an out-of-body experience for the full hand. What is also important, if there is asynchrony, so if the touch is felt at a different moment that you see it, this illusion does not occur. So the subject would not pull away the hand, for example. And what gave the name, what gave the illusion the name is really that you feel this fake hand, although it looks not at all like your hand, it feels like as if this hand is your hand. So what we then went into is we developed a setup that we called video ergo zoom, using video, very simple video technology and 3D images to achieve something similar that I've just shown you, but for the full body. And this is the setup that we used now quite a few years ago. Our experimental subject is standing here, maybe pretty much like the spot that you've seen upstairs. There's a camera behind, and the camera is filming the body and projects it here onto these goggles. And so what the subject sees is what the camera sees, so it sees the virtual body standing 2 meters in front of him or herself. And what we do, very much similar like in the rubber hand illusion, is we applied a tactile cue here, which is felt here, but which is of course seen at this position. And if you do this for a certain while, I'll skip this, but you can measure 2 things. First of all, under these conditions, you self-identify with this body that you see, so you experience that the center of awareness is localized, not where you see the touch and where it should be, but it's at the position 2 meters in front. And if we ask people to indicate where their center of awareness is, it's also misplaced towards this position. So this is if the illusion, if it plays. Okay, no, it doesn't play. But so let me try if I can make this work. Okay, that won't work. It worked before. So when we do this illusion that you've seen, so the touch is applied here, the head-mounted display is worn by the subject, and what you see is a virtual replica of your own body in front. There is this shift in awareness, and again, there's similar brain regions that I mentioned before for the out-of-body experience that are activated here in this red region when subjects have the illusion in a particular strong form. Just some references again. So this back view, I mean, there's many other examples, has been used actually by many painters in special forms of self-portrait, not showing the torso and the face, but showing rather full bodies and back views here by René Magritte. And I'm afraid this video will not play either. Oh, well, it does. And maybe another artist who has used not Dan Graham, but this time Bruce Nauman in his Corda installation has played or investigated this relationship also between self and object, and how in a human way, like I started saying, how it's very difficult and interesting to show this impossibility to catch yourself while walking, because there's a camera here in the back. And the closer you get to those monitors, the further you get away from the camera. So once you make it to the screen, to the small screens, your self-image is very small. The closer you are back at the camera, you're far away from the image. So there's a constant back and forth with impossibility to catch yourself. So the link to Hume, I think, is quite nice. And it resonates, I find, very well, these works with the work of Mark. And I want to, before closing, just present this last work. It's another art collaboration that we're doing with a Swiss-English artist, Nicole Ottiger. And Nicole has used, she's a painter and photographer, and she's used the same technology that I just introduced, this video ergo zoom setup, a camera here, the head-mounted displays here, and she used that setup to create or make a self-portrait. So here she is seen making the self-portrait, and I hope the video plays. She's wearing the head-mounted display, she's filmed from behind, and she's using delays, which is also what she found most interesting, to paint and draw while she's exposed to delays. So I think this was, my part for just starting and telling you about a few aspects of the self and how body representation plays a role, embodiment plays a role for creating the subject of experience. What is it? And those are brain studies and psychology studies that we carried out. What is it in the mind and in the brain that creates the sensation that there's something localized within my bodily boundaries looking your way right now, and the same thing for you, somewhere being in this volume, ill-defined, looking back towards me. What is it? Well, where else should it be? We could ask. But what these data show, and that's really in a nutshell, is that this is a very active brain process. And if it's an active brain process, it means that we can also distort it. And we need to distort it in some way to understand it. And this also gives, and I think it's a very fascinating aspect that you find in much recent art, in particular in the recent work by Mark, that you can create certain situations where the self as observer or the spectator, non-self spectator as observer, can be part of the installation and be involved in very interesting, novel ways, playing exactly and interacting with that representation in the brain, if you want, that I've mentioned. And the last point, I think there's much that neuroscience and related researchers can learn from artists, because, obviously, but I mean, particularly if you're interested in these aspects, there is a lot of ways, if you look in the art of Mark and over the last 50 years, that has not at all been exploited. But for a long time, there is this increasing interest to interact with the observer and to integrate them into the artwork in very interesting ways. And without technology, this has been very difficult. And I think this is really, for us, a very interesting way also, not just to, of course, appreciate the art, but also to see what can we use from those technologies in the science world of the first-person perspective. Thank you.